Welcome to The Pestle, reviewing and breaking down movies to look for insights into the movie-making process. Hosted by True Crime, reopening trauma for easy ratings, instead of writing new material. Now, let's dim the lights and start the show.
Welcome everybody to The Pestle. Today's show is brought to you by Soul Sewing Machines. The sharpest needlework since the 80s. Cross my heart, hope to die. Choose Soul's Sewing Machines. Blah. Welcome everybody to The Pestle. I am Wes.
And I am Todd.
And we are filmmakers, so we attempt to bring the pittance of knowledge of the filmmaking world into analyzing and discussing these films that we cover on a week-to-week basis. I think that's the goal. So
yeah, it's not always what happens.
Not always what happens. We shall see what happens today. What are we going to take a look at today, man?
Today, we're covering the new film that's out just now called The Northman. So if you haven't seen it, please pause this episode and go watch it because we're going to spoil a bunch of stuff.
All the things. We'll look at some of the cinematography, the story and writing. Learning is fun, and other such stuff and things and stuff.
And a quick synopsis of the film. A young Viking prince vows to avenge his father's murder. Written and directed by Robert Eggers. Cinematography by Jarin Blaschke. Sure. Starring Alexander Skarsgård as Amleth, Nicole Kidman as Queen Gudrún, Claes Bang as Fjolnir, Ethan Hawke as King Aurvandil. Ethan Hawke as King Aurvandil. Willem Dafoe as Heimir, and Anya Taylor-Joy as Olga, and Bjork as the Seeress.
You behold your brother's gaze in amazement. I knew well you would. Pity you never paid a bastard's eyes heed before. Now, behold how swiftly your brother swings his sword. Strike, brother, strike. But know that bearing a stolen ring makes no half-breed a king. Soaked in my blood, 'twill soon be sliding off your arm like a serpent. Your kingdom will not last. Let this misdeed haunt your living nights, till a flaming vengeance gorges on your dead. Strike. Strike!
What did you think? I mean, I didn't really know what to expect walking into this thing. Robert Eggers is kind of a master of period pieces at this point. The layer of authenticity that he's going to, try to bring is always going to be just worth it on its own, right? Whether we're talking about The Witch or The Lighthouse. And this is only his third film. And so it's kind of crazy to think he's already got it like an oeuvre that everything fits into so early in his filmmaking career. But walking in, I'm guessing you didn't know what to expect. So I'm just curious if this hit the mark or if, I don't know, was it just not as much as you were hoping for? Or more than?
So I thought it was amazing. I loved I loved it. So here's the thing with movies like this that like scare me is that they try to be too one thing. Like they try to be like, okay, this is going to be super ethereal. You're going to see a bunch of imagery that you really have to think about. Like, how does this tie in? What is this? You're constantly berated by like random images of just beauty, but beauty that you have to then assign a meaning to, right? And it's not obvious that, oh, this is here for that. And then there's the other aspect of like, oh, it's just too straightforward of a story. And it's just kind of boring because I've seen this story before, because we've seen this story for hundreds of years. This is the King Lear or whatever. This is like the this Shakespearean thing. I must avenge my father. We've seen this forever, but I've never seen it like this. This is it's an experience from the beginning to end, and it has all of that stuff built in. I feel like there are these wonderful ethereal moments where we see, things like his heart opening up to the tree, his dad's heart opening up to the tree. There's also, they do a brilliant job of not really publicizing who's in this film. I had no idea that Ethan Hawke was going to be in it, Alexander Skarsgård, and if you're not good with faces, and this is a question I'm going to ask you, if you're not good with faces, it's very hard to see Ethan Hawke in this. His voice is like you've never heard him talk before. He's got this deep, grumbly, growly voice, so you don't expect, that it's somebody that you have ever seen before, because you've never heard this voice before. And there were a couple, I didn't notice him at first, but then when they did a couple of close-ups on him, and I thought, I know that face. That's Ethan Hawke. It took me a second, but then I got it. And all of a sudden I'm drawn into the movie a little bit more, right? Every time I see a new face, when you see Willem Dafoe, you're like, okay, I'm drawn in a little bit more. Then I notice that it's Ethan. I'm drawn in a little bit more. I see Bjork a little later with the Seeress, drawn in more. And it did this really great job of and they don't have large roles, they're just there a little bit and then they're gone. So it pulled me in a little bit here, a little bit there, a little bit here, a little bit there. I thought all of the times where it got really, kind of mystical were important and valid and made sense to push the narrative forward. Every time we see the tree, it's in his mind, he's seeing the tree, and it helps him make his decisions of where his bloodline's going to go, the actions he has to take immediately following. I thought the acting was fantastic and really difficult. Really difficult. This is not I don't know, Crazy Stupid Love, right? Where you have a script and you're delivering lines to each other, and it's just about that delivery with each other, interaction with each other. It's multi-layered because these people have to have accents, they have to be accurate, they have to be delivering lines that they would 1,000 years ago in a way that they saying words that they would say 1,000 years ago. It's just, and it's excellently executed in every single way. I just absolutely adored it the whole time. I couldn't take my eyes off the screen. It's amazing.
Wow.
I thought it was a masterpiece, to be honest.
Nice.
It was awesome. Yeah. Now I'm very curious as to what you thought and how quickly you noticed Ethan Hawke. I don't think you noticed Bjork, you mentioned earlier.
I did not see Bjork like that.
Yeah.
You said that just now before we started rolling. I was like, wait, what? Bjork is it?
Yeah. Well, I mean, she's not exactly, like a
everyday American.
Everybody.
Yeah. But I picked up on Ethan Hawke immediately.
That is amazing. How the hell did
because
you do that?
I look for because I don't recognize faces very well, almost at all. I have to pick up very specifics. And so I do memorize specific features of people's faces. And so I have this Rolodex in my head of, sharp cheeks, because Ethan Hawke has these very sharp cheeks and high cheekbones, right? And he's got this mark coming around the top of his cheekbones, and then he's also got these very specific tooth structure. And so I look at those kind of two things. I'm like, oh, Ethan Hawke. It's you.
You just noticed it. I didn't.
But I struggled a little bit more with Alexander Skarsgård, but luckily I knew it was him coming in. And so that one didn't throw me at all. And I think because it's, Scandinavia and he's Scandinavian, I don't know what part he's from, where I'm assuming the same part his father's from.
Probably,
right. But yeah, so I was able to, I did lose track of Willem Dafoe. I recognized him immediately. So I had a slightly odd experience with this, where I signed up. Alamo Drafthouse a week ago sent out an email blast that's like, hey, if you want to catch an early screening of a movie, sign up. And they don't tell you what movie it is. And so you walk in, and they just play a bunch of commercials or whatever ads and previews, not just regular ads. It's not like I'm watching Toyota trucks right before, this rolls. And so what was odd about it for me, not necessarily that part that I got to see it a few days early, but that we didn't know what we were going to watch, and I got seated in this tiny packed out theater with maybe like 30 seats, and this woman next to me I could hear her talking to her husband like, oh, I wonder if it's going to be the new Thor, because during the pre-roll they were playing all these if you're not familiar with the Alamo Drafthouse, they do these comedic sketches that tie into the movie. So if you're about to go watch whatever, a World War II film, they might play like G.I. Joe cartoons or something of that ilk, right? MASH reruns, clips here and there of all these random things. And so during the pre-roll, they were showing like this cartoon breakdown of Norse mythology. And so you start to get the feeling like, oh, we might be watching something Norse related. And my first thought was, oh, I wonder if it's the Northman, which would be weird because it's not that early of a screening. Like this is coming out in a few days. But the woman next to me was like, oh, I wonder if it's the new Thor, whatever the new Thor is called, right? And she got really excited about that prospect. And I was like, oh, because I have not enjoyed the tone of the last Thor presentation. And so I was like, oh, me and this woman would not get along. And the movie starts rolling. And of course, it's the Northman. And literally she spends, 70% of the movie whimpering because it's a violent film. And so literally she starts like making these big gestures of covering her eyes and literally, I don't know another word to describe other than she's whimpering into like her friends or husbands, I don't know, whoever this guy is that she was with, into his shoulder. And so it was just weird and distracting. But I still really enjoyed it. Now I fled the minute the credits hit. So if there's a post-roll action, I don't know. No. But I went to see it again and enjoyed it so much more the second time for sure. But overall, man, yeah, I loved it. It took me a little while to figure out how do I feel about this, because you're right. It is a perfect blend of ethereal kind of ruminative imagery, but they pair it really well with meaningful sequences. So like, oh, we're not just going to sit in the ether for 10 minutes. We're going to sit there for 30, 40 seconds. And now we're going to watch him pillage a village, right? We're going to see him, what he's really like as an adult. We're going to spend these crucial moments of seeing a plot form in his mind, and the ruthless approach that he's going to take whenever he decides to make himself a slave. I was just like, oh, wow, you have
like there was no
game
he
plan.
Just went straight to it. There was no contemplating or he just like, boom, cut his hair. Let's go. Branded himself. It was amazing. Yeah.
That was amazing. And it wasn't until the second time through that I realized, oh, this is Hamlet. And it only dawned on me, and it was that realization came over the course of 60 seconds, because I was just thinking about the naming convention. I was like, I don't understand these names. That first viewing, I couldn't remember anyone's name. Like, these are such foreign names to me. I had the same problem reading The Three Body Problem, where I'm just like, all these names are so foreign, I can't assign them to anybody. And I had that experience here where I'm just like, I don't know what a Fjolnir is, and I couldn't differentiate that as a word in of itself. It took me half the movie just to start hearing the word Fjolnir, let alone, I never heard the king's name. The entire 2 times I watched this, I never heard his name. It was just King something, Queen something. And Amleth, I finally started hearing really well on the second viewing. And I just started thinking, was there a name convention here? Amleth. Oh, it's like Hamlet, except the H is moved to the end of the word. Okay. Oh, so this is and I started thinking about Hamlet, which I'm not good on Shakespeare. I don't remember Shakespeare, even though I obviously have a lot of reverence for Shakespeare. I'm not that intimately familiar with all these stories. And you could easily fool me between Hamlet and Macbeth. Even though I'm somewhat familiar with both of those stories, I would confuse them in a heartbeat. If you wanted to pull one over my eyes, you wouldn't have a hard time. And so I was like, wait. And I literally started running through the Hamlet story. And I was like, wait, oh no, I'm thinking of Macbeth, Hamlet. Okay. Oh, that's right. Hamlet has been retold, like you said, like dozens and dozens of times. Like even Disney has done their version of Hamlet. Gladiator is a version of Hamlet. And so I started thinking about that, and I was like, wait, but this takes place maybe this is, and I started thinking about Robert Eggers, because Robert Eggers is from what I can gather, like really big into historical accuracy. And I was like, oh, I wonder if actually this is what Hamlet is based on. And I started thinking about it from that standpoint, because you have the Seeress, you have Heimir, who's called a witch, right? That's what the uncle, the murderous uncle calls him, like, shut your mouth, witch, or something along those lines. And so I started kind of playing with the idea of Robert Eggers being this fan. Maybe this is what Hamlet is based on, which a quick Google revealed probably so. I just looked at the wiki for Amleth. And it seems like this is now how he went about writing and formulating that story. I assume it's a mixture of trying to own the Hamlet version, right? How do you one up Shakespeare in one of the greatest plays ever written? Well, maybe you can take it back by telling the original story that Hamlet was based on. And so that's a really interesting concept of, we're going to take back something from Shakespeare. And I feel like that's what was going on here. And so you sit down probably with some historians, and you go through the books, and you start to say, okay, what did maybe Hamlet do that was done really well? And how can we apply that to this original mythos? And that's kind of the fun about this kind of story. I think for me, especially, is watching something like this, I am really engaged with all the cultural knowledge that I feel is inserted into there, right? You see like the rite of passage, and you see him like growling and gathering around this fire with this, I don't know, witch, whatever you want to call him. And he's prophesying, and they're drinking something, and then you realize about halfway through they're probably hallucinating some Scandinavian form of ayahuasca or something, and it's just the berserker ritual right around the bonfire when they're all just getting savage and getting into their primal baser instincts, and I love the combination of those kinds of moments that I could see possibly being rooted in something real. Combining that with the mythos, right? The dream sequences where you're exploring more of the Norse mythology, but without losing the grounded reality, because by making them these whatever hallucinations or fantasies, you can stay grounded for us, the audience, like, oh, while also giving us the experience. Don't tell us it's a fantasy until we're done. But it doesn't feel like a cheap dream sequence. I love that he managed to do that. None of it felt cheap, because that's the struggle you usually run with doing a dream sequence is you give us this crazy outlandish experience, and then you kind of take it away by saying, it wasn't real. Here, you don't ever really know if it was real or not. Like, they blur that line very, very well in the storytelling. And so whenever he has that rite of passage and we're floating and we're hearing a prophecy, you begin to say, oh, this is a hallucinatory, but it still feels connected. It never feels like this ripple in space-time, right? That it ends now. It just becomes something that lasts, and it just blurs and blends together. The fight for the sword with whatever that was, that felt very God of War, I assume, where you're just having to earn this a magical, prop. That was amazing, because you start to feel like, oh, he's approaching this thing, but it doesn't feel dead. And you start waiting for it to wake up, and then it does. And you're like, yes, I want this. I really, really want this experience. And he defeats him, and then he kind of comes to, and then he rips the sword out, and the thing falls apart. It all felt earned. It never felt cheap. That's so hard to do. And I was just kind of in awe of his storytelling prowess to be able to accomplish all those things. Same thing with the being saved by Olga, right? He's saved by her. And now we're imagining, I don't know if that was her, or if that was another actress. With
But I think it was another actress.
It looked like
the Valkyrie.
Yeah.
Yeah, I think it was another actress.
Okay, good. See, this is where they get me. Like, y'all are doing a lot there.
Yeah.
I don't think that's Anya Taylor-Joy, but you win. And it's this beautiful sequence of him being taken by a Valkyrie into Valhalla, and then he wakes. And so it's a really beautiful, and then of course that final shot of him riding into Valhalla. And we just leave on that note. It's beautiful. It allows us to buy into their reality, into their mythos, without ever ripping it away from you, the audience, by saying it wasn't really real. Like, we don't know. It was real to them, and that's real enough for us. And
great.
That's just such a beautiful approach, I think.
So I have a question really quick. One name that we didn't include in the list there was Nicole Kidman. And I was curious. Yeah. And I was curious what you thought.
Yeah.
Did I say it?
Yeah.
Oh, there it is. Duh. Never mind.
Yeah.
Well, I was curious what you thought of her performance.
I was back and forth. I will say she's an incredible actor. And she's having an amazing career. Like,
right.
If you were to kind of go through the last 20 years of her catalog, you would see some really fantastic blends of pop culture stuff along with high art house kind of films. I think, The Human Stain or something like that. She's just got this really incredible career going. And while she has the look for this film, I was a little back and forth on buying into her. There were moments where I was a little more into it and moments where I was a little more pulled out. But I think when it came down to it, the moments that she really needed to sell, she sold. Like that creepy moment between her and her son, where you think, oh my God, is she really willing to do anything, right? And you start to wonder, is he buying into this? And of course, that doesn't last long, but I was there. I was right there with her. And that was such a well-paced moment and such a well-framed moment, the way we just kind of keep closing in and then as she's closing in and then, that you can't help but get frozen in her power. And so I was a little all over the place, but I would say 80% of it, I was bought in, and then but that 20% kind of does a little bit of damage. I think it was the accent. I think if she would have just abandoned the accent and just stayed, that might have worked a little bit better for me. But I think something with her rolling her R's just kind of yanked me away from time to time. What about you? Did you have any issues, or were you just there the whole time?
I felt the same. I felt like her accent at times, not always, was like distracting. That's the best way I could put it, would be distracting. Not like bad necessarily, but I don't really know, because Bjork's R's, I mean, obviously she's Icelandic, so, but her R, she rolls her R's like crazy, right? So Nicole did that, but it was, at times it was just like, and I was trying to separate my knowledge of her from her accent, instead of just saying, which is very hard to do because I'm not super familiar with Icelandic accent, spoken, like sung. Yeah, I've been listening to Bjork for 20 years, but so I know what it sounds like, but like, speaking, it's different. And so I was trying to separate, because I know what Nicole Kidman sounds like when she speaks. So, but I did love her in the role, and the freaky moments, especially the payoff at the end where she tells him that she wanted her father's brother to kill him and to kill him. She wanted him dead too, and it was just like, wow, it was so evil. And like you said, I was right there with her. And you know how I feel about like violence against children, but I felt like in these cases it was necessary. There were two moments, or three moments in particular, that I like noticed. Obviously there was a lot of violence with everyone, women, children, whatever. But the first one was the first time we see the main character rowing in the boat, and there was a father and son in a canoe next to them, and they just the main Vikings just shoot them with arrows, just kill them for no reason, and they'd laugh. That was it was awful, but it was necessary to show the extreme violence that this group of people is not necessarily willing, just like wanting to inflict on the world, right? So that was necessary. And then, the burning of all the people in the building after they raid it, which, by the way, that whole raid scene was so amazing. So amazing and necessary also, because one of the other things that I felt in this movie more than I think any other like Viking period piece that I've seen is just the extreme, not just violence, but hardship of life, right? The whole time I was feeling like, oh my God, I would die immediately if I lived here, immediately. I would just be dead. I would be born and I'd be dead. And I felt that the whole time. It was so stressful. But then the third moment I was speaking about was, right after he she attacks him or something, and he ends up killing her, his mother, and then the kid jumps out and starts stabbing him. I mean, he had to kill that kid, because otherwise that kid is a loose end that then could not be, his family would not be safe. Yeah. And the whole reason he's there is to keep his family safe. So because he has to rid the world of these people. So
absolutely. And it's funny because you feel that two different times, that exact same idea. You feel at the beginning of the film when his uncle orders for his head.
Yes.
And then you feel the injustice of it in that moment. And then, but at the end of the film, it feels more natural. And it's such a funny thing. It's just a matter of who you're rooting for. And it has nothing to do with the ideology of it.
Yeah. And then, and one other thing, and the last thing I'll say, really, well, maybe, I don't know. I love the order of things, right? How the king comes home, and with these films, with all medieval films, all Viking films, there's a king and you never know, is this guy going to be an asshole? Or is he going to be a good father, And we're immediately shown he's a good father, right? Mm-hmm. Or that he loves his son.
Yeah.
And I loved that. I absolutely love that. He's indifferent to his wife, kind of, but he loves his son. And then they have that moment where he won't even make love to his wife. He comes home after a season. He's like, no, I have to do this with my son. It's like, that's his main focus. He has that moment with his son right before he's killed by his brother. And so the scene where the guard tackles him and is about to kill him, and then he cuts his nose off, and then he's rowing away like, I will avenge you, that is understandable because of what that kid just went through. He just shed his last tear. He became a man right before this happened. It was just a perfect timing situation. And for us as a viewer, we get to see him go through this like crazy hardship thing, to rite of passage, I guess, to become a man before he has to do the unthinkable, leave his mother, who's being taken hostage, quote unquote, not avenge his father yet, because he knows he can't, because he's too young, and be patient. But he just became a man, and so he understands that because of what his father had just told him.
And great. I love how that his mantra, right, his promise to himself, I'll avenge you, father, I'll save you, mother. I love how that sets us up for the betrayal twist. Like when you get to the end of the film, all I was expecting was he needs to save his mother because she needs saving. And so I never once considered that she was in on the plot, which is a pretty great feat. That's normally the kind of thing you would suspect early on, especially because Heimir predicts it like twice. And the opening, whenever Fjolnir is in the approaching the king, right? And the, whatever that is, that little ceremony. And Willem Dafoe, jumps out and starts talking about, in jest, right, about the queen getting all this extra attention and being swayed by other men or something like that. And the uncle gets so upset with him. And that should have been a nice tip of the hat because they put it right there on its face. And yet, because of the way everything unfolds and the way they set you up with that promise, you just assume she needs saving that whole time instead of, oh, no, this went according to plan. And then you get to the end and it stings that much more, especially when you start hearing the backstory, not only the betrayal, but why. You start to understand that the king that we thought was a good guy was also a big piece of shit. Like, maybe the reason that he wasn't, needing to go have sex with his wife is probably because he was out raping a bunch of women. Mm-hmm. And he had no needs. They've already been met. And it just recontextualizes everything you experienced in the front of the film. And that's just a brilliant layered, like sequencing, like you were just saying. It's so wonderfully sequenced in a way to distract you from the reality. Because if you have that whole "I'll save you, mother," and then you introduce a prophecy about betrayal, now suddenly it becomes easier to pick up on, oh, this is what's happening, right? Instead, reverse it, tip the hat, and then set us up. That's just really wonderful writing to mislead the viewer. God, agreed, man. So good. The other thing, that you said that I really love is it's nice to experience this kind of period piece without the romanticism. They don't romanticize being a Viking. They don't romanticize the Middle Ages or whatever period this would qualify as. And maybe the Dark Ages. I don't know. 895 AD. It's clearly not the boon of science and industry. but it's dark, and that's the grit and the beauty of what Eggers is doing, is introducing us to a time where there really aren't any heroes. It's just pick your version of evil that you want to live with. I love watching this kind of movie, especially because it makes me appreciate the time we live in now. Like, yeah, you're right, man. I'm dead in this era. It doesn't matter at what point you're born in. There are no good points to live up to a certain era. Like, it's bad no matter what walk of life you're in. Now, you would much rather be a king in this era, I think, than a peasant or slave. But kings aren't living. Today, I am living a way better life than any king in history. Like, there's no way you could get me to exchange places with a king, from 1000 AD. Like, it's just no, thank you. Like, you're constantly watching your back. You're making the worst decisions, and you're just as likely to die of whatever dysentery as anybody else. Yeah, like, it was terrible for everyone. But on the spectrum, you'd much rather be someone in the aristocracy, I guess, than someone not. But
what are the odds of that?
Yeah, not good. And judging by my lack of knowledge of my own family history, I certainly did not descend from kings and queens.
You never know, man.
You never know, I guess. But I feel pretty good about that one. And so, yeah, I love sitting in this kind of reality. Like you said, these guys for sport just killed some people. Like, we're rowing, we're bored of rowing, we're bored of beating on our buddies or slaves. I still don't know what Skarsgård's role was. He clearly wasn't a chief, but he didn't seem to have a lot of say in what was going on. He just kind of acted like everyone else. And I love the presentation of that. I think you're right. I didn't even really chew too hard on that moment, and it's dark. Like, we're just murder to pass the time. Like, good God. Luckily we have, crappy iPhone games now. But the other thing you threw out, like the burning that little hut, I chewed on that for a bit because Charlie was throwing out the idea, like, I'm curious to see how Robert Eggers spends $90 million. Apparently this had like a $90 million budget. I haven't looked it up, but that's a lot of money. And one of the things that, you know, he clearly had to spend a lot of money on, other than getting someone like Nicole Kidman, I don't think she comes cheaply. Despite what her character would have you know, she does not come cheap. And she alone probably 10 million, 15 million. I don't know what her box office worth is, more than anyone else in this film. Even, you know, Willem Dafoe, but he had a short role anyway. But the other thing is set design, right? You're building all these sets probably. Maybe you luck out and there's a few historical sets that have been used and reused by other productions, or I don't know if they have reenactors the way we have them in America. You can find reenactment of Civil War people that are in probably World War I and World War II that have all these uniforms and maybe even have some bunkers and stuff pre-built for their reenactments that as a filmmaker you could go and take advantage of and save yourself, you know, a few $1 million in budget building these things from scratch. I don't know if they had that over in Iceland or wherever else they may have been recording, but short of that, you're building all this stuff from scratch. And that scene where they burn the hut down, I feel like that's a really good place to spend the extra 50 grand or 100 grand, however much, hundreds, to build that hut out of like metal. And now you can shoot this multiple times because that, if you have that kind of budget, why would you risk that shot? And there are times when filmmakers say, we got one opportunity at this. Let's not screw this up. We're going to have 10 cameras and, you know, we'll do what we can, but you can only burn this house down and we can only detonate this building one time, right? Michael Bay's done that a few times. And I get it. Those things happen. In this case, I don't know that needs to happen. You could build it out of metal and have a way to reset the shot so that, okay, let's get 5 takes out of this. And that way, you know, you can get your blocking. You can, you know, have as many opportunities to nail the scene as you want because that's a nice long take. They do a really good job of having a ton of long takes, not necessarily what I would call a oneer per se, where you're doing all this crazy stuff like that intro shot for that raid. They set it up as a oneer, right? You have this beautiful behind shot where you see him grab the spear and throw it. Like that is an epic moment. And right to use that in the trailer because it tells you everything you would need to know. And then we see him scaling the wall. We have a few wipes, right? They have a shield wipe where maybe they use it, maybe they don't. You have where the shield of a foreground character kind of moves really close into the camera. Then you have another wipe where we move through the wall. Maybe that's a wipe, maybe it's not. Maybe they, you know, still are just on a oneer. And then they don't cut though until he jumps down and begins this whole other oneer where he's going through and like he feels people attacking him. It's this interesting thing where he's not staring down his attackers. Instead, you can kind of feel him seeing the field of view, right? His peripheral, his eyes, I imagine, are just wide open as he's taking in as much light as he can to see anything coming at him. And so whenever someone from the left suddenly jumps in, he meets the block. And you have all these things happening. And then I don't think that all, it might, but I think there's another cut before we go into the burning hut. But it just makes sense to me. Why not spend the extra 100 grand or whatever it costs to paint metal in a way that doesn't, you know, destroy the color so that you can reset the straw, because it just looks like straw to the audience. Maybe it's not, or maybe it is straw and you just completely redecorate the hut between takes. I don't know. I doubt it. But maybe. Robert Eggers is a madman, so you really never know with his, you know, approach to authenticity. But that's a great way. The other great thing is shooting on location. Man, this movie would not be what it is without locations. And it's both the most expensive and the cheapest thing you can do. It's really expensive if you're flying out all these A-list actors, right? Getting Anya Taylor-Joy out there, getting Alexander Skarsgård, Nicole Kidman, Willem Dafoe. That's not cheap. Like, you're not only paying for their pre-production time to get the look right and make him look like an incredibly built Viking, but you also have to fly out all your gear and you have to, location scout all these incredible locations. And so it's expensive if you're shooting this kind of film, but it's so much cheaper if you're someone like us. Like, it's for me to hire, some random people that now it's still going to cost me something to get these people into a nice location, but it's not going to cost me Nicole Kidman money. And yet the production value you get out of a great location is just astronomical. You can't help but take note and say locations are what's going to upgrade you first and foremost. If you can do it in a location, that'll save you so much money in set design, set decoration. Like, let's just find an incredible place, and now we can just bring wardrobe and a horse, like, which come with their own expenses, but you cannot replace the location. That's going to upgrade your film, upgrade the quality. That's one of the things I usually spend the most time on, even in my own small $5,000 projects, $10,000 projects, is just location scouting. I'll run around Texas looking for the right location just so that I can upgrade the film's visual quality without spending anything more than gas. Like, that's gas money and time. And that's so much cheaper than trying to make something look better than it is. I don't know if you spend a lot of time finding the right locations for your projects, but I think that's just the best possible use of time in pre-production budget.
Yeah, most of my stuff is the location is what it is. Like, it's not
You
as
don't have a
creative
choice. Yeah.
an outlet as what you've got. Yeah. But yeah, I couldn't agree more.
The other thing they do is, obviously, cinematography wise, a lot of natural lighting. This is very The Witch and probably Lighthouse, but it just seems that his style. I don't imagine they had a ton of added lighting. Instead, some of these days look overcast. And so the hard thing with shooting overcast is you could bring in additional lighting to create that contrast. That probably isn't going to hurt. It's going to help. And then maybe sky replacement in post. But I think the other easy thing to do is just bring in a lot of neg fill, where you'll bring in, black duvetine or a 4x4 floppy, something like that, and put it in close-ups, especially put it right up, close to your actor, so that you can cut down some of the light, and now you're creating dimension, so that you have something that looks like it belongs in a film. The last thing you want is to hand your colorist an image that has no texture or depth. But if you do those things, now you're giving them a lot more room to create contrast and dimensionality into the image in post, because it's halfway built into the image already. And now it's like, okay, we'll go into DaVinci, we'll mask out their face and separate it from the background. And now you can start leveling and creating a little more dimension that way as well. And just fine tuning. It might be a lot more fine tuning in post. But who knows? They did a lot. It looked like a few shots were either day for night, or maybe they were shooting at a time of year where there is no day or maybe there is no night. It was just hard to tell. In that area of the world, you get these really long days that maybe there's not a hard sun, but it's not exactly pure pitch black. And so what happens in that case is you do a lot of sky replacement, like, oh, we're going to insert stars where there are no stars in this shot. And so I imagine they did a ton of sky replacement in this, but hard to tell without actually diving in and reading into his notes. But that's the way I probably would have approached that if I'm them. Now, the one thing they may have done is bring in fire lighting. It didn't look like that light was firelight to me. It may have been, but I don't know how they get that. But maybe, I don't know. I assume that they brought in some flickering, whatever, LED lights or something like that, though. Probably just a little easier to maneuver. But
yeah, I imagine firelight is really hard to shoot with because it's so flickery. Like it's completely unruly. And so, if you're trying to light an entire room somewhat evenly so that you can see people's facial reactions, well, especially if it's like the ones I mean, I'm sure there were a bunch of lit scenes, like a ton of them in this film, but like the one specifically is with him and his mother in that hut.
Yeah, exactly. That's
It
the
was
one I was thinking of too.
it wasn't very flickery. It was very like steady and kind of like even,
Yeah.
throughout. And I just remember thinking, I didn't think during, but now that you're talking about it, it makes me think like that was very kind of like smooth. It probably wasn't firelight, like now that I think about it. But also, that was the brilliance of this film for me, was that it didn't have to be perfectly physically accurate because it was a little bit fanatical.
Yeah.
It was a little, and so I expected some things that weren't exactly, I don't know, completely accurate, like that light kind of lighting. And that was okay with me. Like I just didn't notice it as much. So
Totally. Yeah, I agree. I mean, the tone was there, and so you can cheat where you need to cheat. And no one's going to be the wiser because we're already so invested, and you've already sold us so hard on the era that there's nothing left to do but just sit and be consumed. But there's still actual firelight shots, obviously, like the bonfire when he's backlit. And that's straight inspo for me because I'm working on some similar stuff, some similar imagery. And I love seeing those kinds of images and saying, okay, oh, nice. He went really, really wide. Like that's a wide shot of everybody's full body against the fire. That's nice. But it's such a hard job creating cinematography that is that specific. I didn't get the sense there's a lot of ad hoc, shooting going on. Everything looked very particular and specific and planned. And it was hard to tell what is CG and what's not. There's this shot, oh my God, and it just blew my mind both times, where it's this beautiful wonder on the boat when he decides, I need to go back in order to save you. And he's talking to Olga, and he dives off the boat, and we're sitting there with Olga, and she's like so upset and distraught, and then immediately resolve takes over, and she starts I don't know if it's an incantation or just a promise or a swear, or an invocation. Like it's hard to tell, but we stay with her, and then she starts screaming and swearing to the wind or invoking the wind, and right when she finishes, like she throws her hands up, and this huge gust of wind hits the sail. And I was just like beside myself. I was like, I have no idea what just happened here. But my God, that was amazing. Because the timing was absolutely impeccable. And so it could have been rigging. It very well could have been, hey, let's rig up a bunch of wire, and so that we can get just the perfect billow out of this sail. Or it could have been CG and there was no mast there at all. I have no idea. But it looked real. The lighting to it looked real. Clueless.
Yeah, I loved that. Dude, I loved that moment. This is just like the life back then. Everyone has to make hard decisions in the moment immediately, and you have to get over shit immediately. So she didn't want him to leave. She wanted them to just have a life together. And the moment he left, she screamed for him not to leave. And the moment he left, she made the decision, all right, I'm going to do this spell or incantation, and we are going to get where we're going faster. And so she does the spell, the wind hits the sail, and she's like, okay, we're going. He's gone. Now we're going, and I'm going to protect my children, right? I totally agree. It's so easy to immediately cut off the boat, to him swimming. And they eventually do that. Mm-hmm. But it's almost like a finished story for her character of a resolve to make his sacrifice worth it, right?
Yeah.
I've made that decision instantly. I can't stop him from going, so we're going this way. It was so good, so good. And then what about the Gates of Hell fight scene? How amazing! God, like honestly, I sit there and I watch it, and you think of one of the Star Wars films and how bad that was. And how good this was. We find out during that they're both naked, and because there's nothing to hide. One or both of them will die, and it's like they just are, just so epically, amazingly executed in not only choreography and what happens, but also in the lighting. How do you light for that? I mean, obviously it's backlit because of the lava, but I mean, I can still make out a lot of their features, a lot of the muscle tone, a lot of, it was just unbelievable.
The madness of that scene, I was like, he didn't film inside a volcano, did he?
Yeah, right? You didn't think, this isn't practical, right?
Right. I would imagine, I don't know, if I'm doing that scene and I'm like, what's the best way to create the reality of this? I am probably doing a virtual production set. Like, I'm building out this texture of the floor and I'm surrounding it with, virtual production screens so that we can get all the visuals right. And then in post, I'm adding all this crazy amount of haze, and, a lot of flourishes to sell the kind of the heat, because you have these beautiful heat waves kind of creeping across the screen. And it's just, yeah. And it took my breath out whenever he cut his head off, and I'm like, oh my God, I thought he was done. I didn't know what was going to happen. I love feeling that as an audience member, is to say, I don't know what happens next. And I see he won, and he has that berserker moment where he starts like firing himself up, and the performance there is amazing. And he gets up, fights him off, gets his head, and I'm like, oh my God, he's good. He's gonna return, and he's gonna be with Olga again, which is what I really wanted. And then two things happen. Of course, the guy falls down and lets go of the sword, and you realize almost slowly, it took me a couple beats to realize, oh, the sword isn't moving. He stabbed him. No.
Yeah, I was the same.
Oh, what a great gut punch moment. But the other thing I like that happened there is I love that fall from Fjolnir. Like, that felt, one of the things that always bothers me with death scenes, especially something as dramatic as getting your head lopped off, is you can feel the controlled fall of an actor. And it always pulls me out just a little. And depending on the film, it's maybe not that big a deal, or maybe it is. The more dramatic, the bigger a deal it is. But you have to commit, because without your head, there's no way to control. You have no control over your body. And so there's this really great looseness, chicken quality of, the way his body kind of flops and shivers, is just, I thought, phenomenal. But then, of course, the gut punch of realizing Amleth is gone, and that moves you into this other beautiful sequence of him hearing the voice of his wife as he as the horse rides out to him, and he rides back. And I love that we never see him get into Valhalla. That's always one of those little decisions you have to make in almost any edit, especially at the end of a scene. Do you see the character leave, or do you see them beginning to leave, and then you cut before they exit the frame? That's always an odd choice, because there's a slight awkwardness to either one of those. If you see them leave, now you're leaving the audience with an empty frame. And what does that tell? What does that feel like? Or do you cut before they exit the frame? And you just imply a thing. And it depends on what you're leaving and what you're going to. All those factors kind of come in. And for this, I want to say that's the last shot of the film, and we never see him get into Valhalla. And I think that's beautiful, because in our mind, he's always getting into Valhalla. He's always right there. And we're seeing and imagining what that moment feels like for him. And it's just a nice emotional beat to imprint on the audience as you leave the film.
Agreed. And the shot of the tree right before that, from his eye, we see the tree, and it scrolls up to his two children. And the whole time they've been talking about a woman on the throne, the queen. And I thought it was Olga the whole time, but it's his daughter. and we get that close up on her, and we stay with that for a few seconds, as in he's not shy to give you some like a moment with this thing, and a lot of times in movies like this, you don't get that moment. You just have to piece it together, and you know how we like that kind of thing, and
Yeah.
I'm not, don't shy away from it, but in a movie that's as layered as this, I feel like in some moments you kind of need that, and we had that. They gave it to us, and then I love that we don't see them actually ride into Valhalla too. I think that's a great choice. But yeah, so good. I totally agree with the fall, because it felt very awkward for both of them. It was
Yeah.
like, oh God, that had to hurt your knees or whatever, because he falls backwards.
Yeah.
And so, but I totally agree.
So good. Yeah.
Yeah.
It's a really well executed film. It's not maybe the kind of thing you want to watch on repeat, but it's honest. I think that was kind of my bottom line interpretation. Is this felt like a really honest telling of a really brutal era, and we could probably stand a little more of that. We get enough of the Disneyfication of period pieces. We also need to be reintroduced to the brutal reality of history, and so
Agreed. I couldn't agree more that the whole time watching that, I was like, we live in an amazing time. Amazing time. Everybody talks about how bad the world is. You guys, shut up.
Yeah.
That is absolutely not true. The world is incredible and amazing. I mean, like, I could just list 30 things, off the top of my head right now as to why.
Yeah.
And this movie exploits that very, very well. It just tells that brutal story. And I agree. I couldn't watch this again. And I remember thinking that, like, I don't want to watch this again, but I'm so glad I watched this.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Totally. Obviously there's always work to be done, but
Sure.
my God, let's not, look the gift horse in the mouth kind of thing. Nice. So that's all I got. What are you going to recommend this week?
Oh yeah. So this week I was trying to stick with the Viking thing, and there's not really a whole lot of like good, like really super amazing Viking films that I, want to recommend necessarily. But the 13th Warrior is probably the best one that I could come up with, and I love Antonio Banderas' performance in it. I feel like there's some things that could have been done better. Like the other warriors, their characters they were maybe underdeveloped a little bit, but as a story, I thought that it told the two sides really well. It wasn't just like a very one-sided story. So I enjoyed it, and it's not like super, super old and annoying. It's actually pretty, current or whatever, but so I'll recommend the 13th Warrior.
Nice. I'm going to recommend You Won't Be Alone. It's a new film out starring Noomi Rapace. And it's, if you really loved The Northman, I think you would really love You Won't Be Alone. It's a lot of similar ideas, completely different culture. I want to say it's exploring like Turkish culture from, I don't know, the same era, maybe even 700-800 AD. I mean, it's really old in that way, and it explores some of the mythos. It's beautiful, it's ethereal, but there's still enough story to kind of grab onto. But it does leave you with your thoughts a lot in a way that I found beautiful. It's filmed in this beautiful natural light kind of way, and I left there feeling really inspired from watching that, and so I enjoyed it. It's a patient film, so you need to walk in with your patient hat on, but I think you'll enjoy it. And there's a lot of really brutal and beautiful elements to it for sure.
Cool.
Nice. Stay tuned for next week. We're going to kick off a series, periodic series on Asian cinema. We're going to begin with Chungking Express. It's from the Hong Kong filmmaker Wong Kar-wai. So stay tuned for that. Go check it out and be prepared to discuss, class. And if you're enjoying the show, don't forget, subscribe, drop us a review on iTunes or wherever you get your podcast, and leave us a note if there's something you want us to talk about, the kind of thing you find interesting, we can always dive a little deeper. Yeah. And so if you want to leave a note on this episode, you can do that at thepestlepodcast.com/the Northman.
And today's quote of the day is from Dan Carlin. History is the autobiography of a madman.
Yeah. So watching this, my first thought was, my God, this feels like Dan Carlin like made a film, because it has all the kind of brutal savagery that you would expect from a Viking story. It doesn't feel romanticized like we were talking about. And so Dan Carlin, and I guess I've also just recently finally started listening to Dan Carlin here and there. He's not a hard listen, but he's a time consuming listen. And so if you don't have the ability to string together like a 5-hour podcast, it can be hard to dive into Dan Carlin's hardcore history if you've never, listened to it. And so, yeah. And I was just curious what interesting quotes, and he's got a lot. But this one I thought stood out because, yeah, history is the autobiography of a madman. History, we tend to forget because of how good we relatively have it by historical comparison. Like we tend to forget how brutal and unforgiving history has been writ large. Like it's hard to pick an era out of history where everything was cool. I recently was going back through and I read Plato's The Republic, where it's a conversation between Socrates and all these other philosophers. And he comes so close to saying really good things, and then he says really terrible things. And they had slaves, and I was telling you, Todd, I was like, there's this interesting moment when you start to think they're going to understand equality. Like Socrates is about to go all in on equality, and he's talking about how, hey, if we're building the perfect society, y'all aren't going to like this. Y'all are going to laugh at me and think I'm an idiot, but women should have just as much ability to go and pursue their interests as men. Like they should be able to be out and working and creating things and doing contributing to society in their own way. And the people are around, the philosophers are sitting around thinking, they're like, yeah, you know what? That is kind of wild, but you might be onto something if we're being honest with ourselves. But obviously they could never be as good as a man. And he's like, well, yeah, of course, women could never do anything as good as a man. Let's not be over the top here. And I was just like, wow, bro.
So close.
You're so close. But yeah, so far. And so there's all this interesting, and that's just history. History is unforgiving, in so many ways. And it's easy to kind of forget about that. And so it goes back to the thing we've said a few times. Like, I appreciate Robert Eggers just kind of having this brutalist approach to a period piece. And I love it. I like darker subject matter. And so this fits very well with all my wants. I love mythos. I'm not particularly big on like Viking and Norse mythology. I'm more into Greek stuff, but it piques my interest to be able to sit in and hear the way they invoke it and the way they think about their lives. And Odin brought them home, didn't he? And there's just this beautiful call to their gods and to their deities. And yet there's these other brutal realities, like the sport that they invent, right? They play the craziest game of polo you can imagine, right? And I'm just sitting around thinking like, you know what? I think this game could probably use a few more rules. Like y'all, I get it. It's entertaining, but maybe one where not everyone has to die except one person.
So we missed one. The big guy in that game. Did you recognize him?
Is that Halfdoor?
Yes.
It wasn't until this very second, because I recognized he has this. I don't know if he's going through something where his mouth is half paralyzed. And I saw that and I recognized it, but I absolutely could not pin it down until just a second, and it jumped out at me.
So he is Icelandic, right? And Nordic, and he played. He played the Mountain in Game of Thrones, was the strongest man on the planet for a couple of years. is a gigantic dude, and he plays the main guy who just kills everyone in that game.
And he's huge, but they also kind of undersold how big he is.
Yeah, that's true. But our main character, what's his name?
Amleth.
Yes. No, yeah. He's huge.
Big.
He is huge in this film. They did an amazing job. Yes, they downplayed the mountain for sure because he's like 7 feet tall and 350 pounds of pure muscle. And by the way, he's much more muscular now than he ever has been. He's leaned up a lot.
Oh.
So he's leaned up a lot, but they cover him up in this that garb or whatever.
Uh-huh.
But our main character is gigantic. I mean, they do a really good job of doing a lot of up shots when he's just standing there.
Yep.
He hunches over a lot. His lats are gigantic. His back is like all
Traps and lats,
and
ow.
they're just huge. They whatever training they did it really, really smart. You don't really notice his gigantic arms. You notice his lats, his traps, the things that make you really look looming and like overly large, right? And it's not really an arm thing. It's the torso, it's the upper torso and the top of the neck that like actually makes you seem larger.
Yeah, and I suspect they built it that way because of rowing, right?
Right, exactly.
If you spend all that time rowing, which by the way, I just bought a concept to. I finally pulled
you
the
did
trigger.
buy it. There you go. Good for you.
Yeah.
You're gonna get super fit.
I saw the Northman and I had to do some rowing. No. And yeah, so you know that rowing, I assume, is going to build a lot of lat and trap, because your traps aren't just the things sticking out of your neck. They also run down the middle of your back. And so make those huge. And of course, he's a tall guy. I'm pretty sure he's a big guy, but they cut his body fat down right. And so he's probably a good 9-10% body fat. Yeah. It's common. I don't know if he took anything, but it's pretty common in Hollywood. Like, you have deadlines to meet, so maybe bump a little test or something. I don't know if he had to do that, because I think he's always seemed to me undersized. I feel like he's never really trained as hard as he probably could for size. I don't know if that's intentional to play because he doesn't want to get pushed out of some of these roles that he wants, right? He plays a lot of these husband and interesting characters that aren't jacked. And so I feel like maybe it wasn't that hard for him to add, 15 pounds of muscle, because it's probably always been lurking there waiting for him if he would just get into the gym. And then, like you said, they shot him in a way that emphasized all that stuff. Those two things combined, my God. But and how about Fjolnir? He had some hams on him, man.
Oh my gosh, man.
That dude's hams were lush. My God, bro.
Lush. Agreed. Indeed. Oh.
Nice. Okay. I'm
anyway, yeah. This is so much fun. I absolutely adored this film. Hard second watch possibly, but such a. I'm glad it exists for sure.
Yeah.
So yeah, thank you for joining us, and make sure to subscribe. Join us on iTunes. Review us. Share us with your friends. All that stuff, because all of it helps. And if you have a film that you'd like to hear us review, please let us know. We'd love to hear from you. And like Wes said, join us next week for Chunking Express. Until next time, I'm Todd.
I'm Wes.
Go watch some movies.
Yeah.